Did you know you've been stacking your comics all this time the wrong way? I'm going to teach you how to make it even better. Hello everybody, my name is Chris and this is my channel We Love Comics. Thank you as always for taking the time to watch one of my videos, and hopefully today I'm going to help you, especially if you're new to the comic world, how to make your books stay in the best conditions possible. And I've seen situations where even pro comic book collectors do simple mistakes that could end up damaging the comics over the long period of time, even if you're storing them quickly. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips that will hopefully help you to keep your comics in the best condition possible. Now, as you can see, the first thing I'm showing is a major don't in comic book storage. The last thing you want to do is have your comics lay down flat. Now, the one tip I'm going to tell you, even if you have no choice to do it this way, there is a better way. Now, you'll see most people when they stack their comics, they stack them all in the direction of either face up or face down. And I'm going to show you why that's a problem. If you see it from this angle, you'll notice this side is thicker than this side. Because what happens is, because you have staples on this side of the book, this side's going to bunch up a little bit. So you could see how it gets thinner as it goes. So if you lay them all on one side, what's happening is this side's going to be a little bit heavier. It's going to compress on your books, and it's going to cause, if you've ever seen all the way up and down that spine, that little groove that goes up and down, that's from people putting too much weight. So when you place them flat, even in bags and boards, because as you see, again, it's going to be thicker here, and it gets a little thinner as we go here, so it's going to have uneven weight distribution, which is going to cause extra stress on the spine, which causes a lot of cracks, a lot of breakage, and that indent. So right off the bat, you don't want to be laying them down, but let's just say you actually have to. This is the best way to do it, and this is what I always do. You lay one down face up, the next one face down, then face up, face down. The reason that you want to do that is, what's happening is now that you're equally distributing the weight of the comic. So this way, if you have to do it this way, which, like I said, I don't recommend you laying down your comics, but if you, for some reason, had no choice, I don't know why, but just in case, what this is doing is evenly distributing the weight. So now, and I'll straighten this up, it is now completely even, so the pressure is going to be distributed in both directions. So that's the first thing we do. So when it comes to bags and boards, there's been a lot of controversy about that. To me, obviously, Mylars are the top to go, but they can be expensive, and if you have thousands of books, you may not be able to afford to do that. But obviously, Mylars are going to be the best because they're going to last probably longer than you will. So, I mean, if you want to never have to change your bags and boards, Mylars are the best way to go. Now, you can use the cheaper versions of the regular poly bags. If you know how to store things properly, you can still keep your comics in really good condition. And the rumor of having to change your bags every 5 years just does not hold water if you store your comics properly. In other words, you keep them away from moisture. You don't put your comics near a heat source. You don't put them in an unfinished basement or attic where the temperatures can extremely change. Because one thing you have to understand about comics, they're obviously, you know, they're made of paper. Now, even if you have the best bag in the world, let's say this was the most expensive Mylar there is with the most expensive backboard, there's still air that's going to get in here because these are not vacuum sealed. So there's going to be condensation. So if you have extreme temperatures where you're putting your comic books, where it goes extremely cold at one point and extremely hot in another, it creates microscopic water vapor, which could eventually start creating mold on the microscopic level, which is what starts to brown your comics and starts deteriorating them. So be very careful where you store your comics, because that's just as important. Because, you know, if you're going to spend a lot of money on Mylars and halfbacks and things like that, and you put them flat down, or you put them next to a radiator, or you just throw them up in the attic where there's no insulation, all you're doing is having a more expensive way to deteriorate your comics. So be very mindful of where you're placing your comics, because paper is going to be something that does not last forever. So unless you're vacuum sealing them and never being able to read them, because even when you have CGC, PGX, or CBCS, or any graded comics, they're not vacuum sealed. So it's going to help keep them better longer, but it's not going to keep them that way indefinitely. So here's the next part I want to talk about that I've seen even the most professionals do. And I understand why they do it. Even comic book dealers do this, but they have to. Now, you'll notice when people put comics in their boxes, they all have the comics facing the same way. And I've seen people where they pack them so tight that it's almost like you have to force a comic in. There should always be extra space to let your comics breathe, because otherwise they're going to compress and press against each other, and again you'll start getting that concave all the way up and down the spine, which is definitely going to degrade the value of your comic. Now, most people, they'll take their comic and they'll face them all in one direction. Now, obviously, that's going to be for convenience, because if you want to look through your books, it's a lot more convenient to go along the whole thing and be able to just lift it up and see. But that's not the best way to keep your comics in the best condition, because again, like I showed with the comics laying down, if they're all facing the same way, you're going to have this slanted kind of look. Because if you open up your comic book boxes, if you really look at them, you'll see that the books will be angled a little bit like this over time, the more you have in here, because you're going to have the thicker side on one side with the staples, and the thinner side is going to compress, and when you press them together, it's not going to be flat perfectly. So you're going to have extra weight distribution on the thicker side, which eventually, especially if you cram your books in the boxes, because, you know, when you collect thousands of boxes, and you could see I have several long boxes, and this is just some of them, it can get rather expensive, but you want to make sure you're not ruining your comics, as opposed to saving, what, $4 or $5 on an extra comic book box? So again, what you want to do is, well, the first thing you want to do is on the end of each one, before you even put in a comic book, place something like a thick piece of cardboard, because if you see right here, when you have a comic book box, there's a lip there. And if you put a comic directly on that with all the pressure, it's going to cause a little bend in the bottom part of the comic. So that's the last thing you want, especially if it's an expensive comic. So the way I avoid that is I take a piece of cardboard and put that in on both sides. So this way it keeps the comics as straight as possible. So that's a tip I've hardly ever seen anybody demonstrate. But this is what I do. Here's the first comic. Notice how it's facing me. Then the next comic is facing away. And as you could see, facing forward, facing away, facing forward, and facing away. So I do that throughout the entire comic book box. Now you can see I haven't filled this one up yet. So what I do is, again, you see at the end of the comics, I put cardboard, so this way it keeps this straight as possible. And then I put some kind of support here until I fill it up a little bit more. Because if you leave this to the point where they slant, again, you can actually have one maybe slip a little bit and start to bend, or it causes uneven pressure. Because if you know anything about weight distribution, the more you equalize the weight distribution, the less pressure on a specific pinpoint. So if you have this extra space, in other words, if you have a box that isn't completely filled yet, and you leave this empty, these books will start to slide or fold over, which causes an extra amount of pressure. So your best bet is to find, first of all, like I said, put cardboard at the end for the support, but put something in there that keeps your books standing up straight, but also, as you can see, flexibility to allow them to breathe. Because if you stuff these in so much that you have to force them in, you're going to compress your books. It's going to cause added pressure, especially along the spine, which is going to cause color breakage. It could pop the staples out, and it's just going to damage your comics. And obviously, if you want to keep your comics in the most pristine condition, you absolutely don't want to do that. So the one thing is, when you do them in this direction, you're not going to be able to fit in as much comics. So let's assume this box holds 150 comics, just a guess. Let's say if you put them the regular way, it would hold 150 comics. Well, if you do it this way, where you're doing face front and then reverse and then back and forth each time, you're probably only going to be able to fit 140. So you're going to have less comics in there, but they're going to be supported. The weight will be equally distributed. It's going to take less pressure. And when you have this extra room, they're not going to squeeze together and compress. So you're going to have comics that are going to last longer. So when it comes to your collection, if you want to keep them in pristine condition, you want to do the simple things. Now, this may be a little inconvenient when you're trying to look for a book, because now you have to zigzag in and out, but I would rather have that extra 1 second of having to turn the book around than to find out my collection has been all compressed together, and now I have to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars getting my books pressed, or saying, oh, I'm just not even going to bother grading this one because now there's an indent all along the spine. So hopefully these little things will help improve your comic collection, be able to keep them in better condition, and be very wary where you keep your books. That's very important. You know, there are plenty of people that'll tell you to get the best bags and boards, which is definitely good advice. But if you don't store your comics properly, then you're just wasting your money. And why do that? So hopefully this will also not only save you money, but save the condition of your books. And if you have to spend an extra $5 here and there for an extra box, it's worth it. So if you appreciate this advice, sharing it to get it out there really helps. So if you want to hit the share button or post it on your social networks, it always is appreciated, because if it helps one person make their collection just a little bit better, then I'm glad to help. If you want to hit the thumbs up, we always appreciate the support. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Leave your comments. Tell me what you think. If there's something I missed, please put that in there so we could share with the community and help others, especially newer people in the comic book collecting, to be able to keep their comics in the most pristine condition possible. Just have fun, and remember, it's not you, it's not I, it's We Love Comics. Thanks for watching. I enjoyed making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I'll see you next time.